Kia ora koutou katoa and welcome along to another episode of Beyond the Hustle. And as you can see, I'm flying solo today. And the reason for that is because I am going to spend this episode exploring a kaupapa, a topic that I've been thinking a lot about lately, and that is unconscious bias. I believe that unconscious bias is a really important kaupapa for us to understand in the wider context of what's going on around the world, but especially here in Aotearoa as well, especially as it relates to equity and equality. And so in this video, I'm going to dive right in and try and unpack what is unconscious bias? How does our unconscious mind work? And because it's this thing that controls so much of how we feel, who we trust, how we react, and so much more. So if that's interesting to you, then hang around and let's get into it. Okay, so unconscious bias. Where do we start? Well, let me start first of all by saying that I'm not a scientist, and I'm certainly not a neuroscientist, which means I don't have an amazing in-depth understanding of how the brain works, but I know a little bit, and I'm going to try and share with you today what I do know about how our two minds, our conscious and our unconscious mind, work together to control what it is that we do and how we respond. Okay, so the way I understand it is that we have this thing called the brain. And the brain is made up of billions of nerve cells. And these nerve cells are firing every single moment of every single day. It's kind of like a supercomputer. And there's a small little sliver of our brain, which we refer to as the conscious mind. This is the part of the brain that's responsible for all of our logical, our deep analytical, deep thinking that we have to do as human beings. And then everything else in the brain makes up the unconscious mind, which we're going to get into in a moment. But in a nutshell, our brain is like a supercomputer and it is capable of doing just millions and millions of computations every single second. It's a powerful, powerful thing. So obviously our brain is made up of lots and lots of different parts. And like I said earlier, I'm not a neuroscientist, so I'm not going to attempt to try and explain what they are because honestly, I don't even know. But what I have learned is that we have two different minds. We have an unconscious mind and we have a conscious mind. Now, they're quite different from one another, but one of the main differences between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind is that the conscious mind is capable of processing up to 40 pieces of information every single second. Now, that might seem like quite a lot. That seemed like a lot to me when I first learned that. But when you compare it to what the unconscious mind is capable of doing, it's nothing. So the unconscious mind, according to all the research that's been done, is capable of processing up to 11 million pieces of information every single second. And that's just unfathomable. But because the unconscious mind is processing so many millions of pieces of information and data points every single second, it requires some seriously efficient data management. And that's what we're going to get into next. But before we do that, let's just understand what the unconscious mind is responsible for doing. So the unconscious mind basically is responsible for keeping us alive and for keeping us safe. So the unconscious mind does things like ensures that our hearts keep beating, that our organs keep working, that blood keeps flowing all around our body. It regulates our temperature, it tells us to breathe, it tells us to blink, it keeps us safe by assessing all the risks around us, it helps us to decide who we can trust and who we shouldn't trust. It's also the part of our brain that's responsible for controlling all of our emotions and how we feel. All of that stuff happens on autopilot, and that's because our unconscious mind is taking care of it for us. And it's a bloody good thing that it doesn't check in with our conscious mind, because honestly, that would drive us mental. Imagine having to consciously, every single second of every single day, make a decision about, do I want the blood to flow around my body? Do I want my heart to keep beating? Do I want to blink? Do I want to regulate my temperature? We're just not set up to be able to make that number of decisions every single day. So it's a bloody good thing that we've got a system to take care of all of that for us, aka the unconscious mind. So because our unconscious mind doesn't have time to check in with our conscious, logical, analytical brain, which is the conscious mind, It has to rely on its own source of information. And so the way I like to think of this, right, is that when we're born, we know nothing. Or if we do know some stuff, it's very limited, right? So those first few years when we're young are just jam-packed with learning experiences. We're learning how to walk, we're learning how to talk, we're learning how to behave, we're learning who we can trust. I mean, like everything is new when you're a baby and when you're young, right? And so the way I like to think of this internal filing system that our unconscious mind refers to is like a bookshelf. I'm pretty old school like this. There's a number of ways that you can think about this, but for me, I just think of this giant bookshelf. And when we're born, the bookshelf has got no books on it. It's just completely empty. And as a youngster, as we learn something new, we basically write a book. And once we've written the book, that book goes up on the bookshelf and it stays there. And it becomes part of the library or the database or the internal filing system that our unconscious mind refers to and helps us to make decisions. So when we learn how to walk, we write a book and we say, we've learned something new. This is how you walk. And that book gets closed up and it gets stored away on the bookshelf. Now our unconscious mind doesn't have to think. It just knows how to walk because it constantly goes back to that book and goes, oh, yes, I know how to do this. I know the answer. Left foot, right foot, stay balanced, etc., etc. And then we learn how to run and we write another book and that book goes up on the bookshelf, how to run. We learn how to talk and then we write a book and then that book goes up on the bookshelf. So we're starting to fill up our bookshelf with all of these new things that we've learned. We learn that when you touch the oven, it gets hot. So we write a book. Don't touch the oven, it's hot. We learn that when we go outside, if we're not wearing any clothes, we get cold. So we write a book. Next time we go outside in the cold, put on a jacket, stay warm. We're constantly learning all of these new skills. We're having all of these experiences, and we're writing books every single time we learn something for the first time. All of our thoughts, they all live on the bookshelf. And that bookshelf is the internal filing system that lives within each and every one of us, and all of our bookshelves look different. And that is where our unconscious mind goes to retrieve information and figure out what the answer to how to walk, how to talk, how to breathe, how to live, how to stay safe, how to behave, what to do, what not to do, all of that sort of stuff. Now, the other types of things that influence some of the books that are on our bookshelf are some of the things that we hear when we're growing up. So if we've got an uncle that is a little bit racist and he feeds us information while we're young, because we trust that person, when they tell us something and they teach us something, we believe them. And so we write a book and we go, well, that must be true. What uncle said about that group of people must be true. So we write a book about it and that book goes, you guessed it, on the bookshelf. And then our neighbor says something about the person down the road and we go, oh, that must be true. So we write a book and it goes up on the bookshelf. And then we go to school and we learn a version of history and we go, well, I trust my teacher. Everyone's telling me that the teacher's right. So we write a book and that goes up on the bookshelf. So all of our lessons, all of our experiences when we're young, we write books about all of them and they all live up on the bookshelf. So for all of you maths geniuses out there, our conscious mind has the ability to process around about 40 pieces of information every single second versus our unconscious mind, which has the ability to process up to 11 million. So that means that the vast majority of the decisions being made by us are unconscious at a rate of something like 11 million to 40. Like it's pretty massive. Mind you, it is worth noting that the types of decisions that our conscious mind is being asked to make all of the time require a lot more analytical thinking. And so it's not to say that our unconscious mind is far more powerful than our conscious mind. It's just that our conscious mind has to process different types of information and make different types of decisions, usually heavier, weightier decisions. And that's why it takes longer to process each piece of information. We have to sit with it, think about it, analyze it, look at the pros and the cons, and then arrive at a decision. And that takes a lot of computing power, and that's what our conscious mind is responsible for. But what it also means is that all of us have an unconscious mind who is making decisions for us all day, every single day. And because that unconscious mind does not check in with our conscious mind before it makes those decisions, it makes decisions on its own. And it looks to our internal filing system to retrieve information in order to help it make decisions when it needs to. Therefore, the information that's stored on that bookshelf in that internal filing system is really, really important, because that is the only source of information that our unconscious mind has to go and consult with. So if the information that you were fed as a child is completely different to what you currently believe, I've got bad news for you. Your unconscious mind is not aware of that. So therefore, your unconscious mind is going to that bookshelf, trying to find the answer as quick as it can, and is producing an answer unconsciously, you're not aware of this, based on that information in that bookshelf. Another way perhaps to think of this is your unconscious mind is kind of like ChatGPT or another large language model AI. The way that ChatGPT works, from what I understand, is that it's gone and it's read a huge amount of information on the internet. That becomes its memory. That becomes its source of information. And when we ask ChatGPT a question, or we give it a prompt or an instruction, it goes to all of the information that it's got and it very quickly produces an answer. Well, that's basically exactly how your unconscious mind works as well, except that it's not going to the internet, it's going to your internal filing system in order to retrieve the answer. So your unconscious mind is basically your own version of ChatGPT, but rather than getting the information from the internet, it's getting the information from your bookshelf. And your bookshelf is full of books that you have written throughout your entire life based on your lived experiences, based on the things that the people in your tribe have told you, based on what you've learned, and so on and so forth. So all of that is to say that to be unconsciously biased is neither a good nor a bad thing. To be unconsciously biased is to be human. You're biased, I'm biased, everyone is biased. The question, however, is how are we biased? And the answer is we're biased towards whatever the books are that are sitting on our bookshelf. Now, like I said, I'm old school. If you don't like the bookshelf analogy, kaupapa, that's all good. You can talk about a hard drive, you can talk about an internal filing system. However you want to imagine it, this is the place that all of the information is stored. That's all. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about human beings and how we are hardwired to build tribes. We are tribal animals. All over the world, since the beginning of time, humans have needed to build tribes because we need to surround ourselves with people who we can trust. And the reason for that is pretty simple. We need people to watch our back at night so that we don't get eaten by the wild beasts. But also, we need people who we can rely on and who we can trust to have our backs so that if we ever have to take on our cousins down the road, we've got an army or a tribe behind us who can support us. So from the beginning of time, all human beings have needed to build tribes. We are tribal animals. And so the question is, how do we decide who can be in our tribe and who is on the outside? And the answer to that question lies in who we can trust and who we can't trust. So the question is, how do we know who we can trust and who we can't? The most basic way to understand this is the people who mirror us are the people that we are most likely to trust. The more alike we are with another person, the more likely it is that we are going to trust them. And therefore, the higher the likelihood of them being let into our tribe. The opposite is also true. The more different we are, the less likely it is that I'm going to let you into my tribe. And a really fun exercise to kind of test this theory out is to try and mirror back to somebody exactly what they're putting out towards you next time you're speaking to them. So for example, next time you're speaking to someone, if they've got their legs crossed, I want you to cross your legs. And if they're sort of folding their arms like this, then you fold your arms. And every time they nod, you nod along with them. And if they shake their head, then you can shake your head as well. Basically, you're trying to mirror back to them what they are putting out towards you. That's body language. And then you also mirror back what they're saying. So let's say they say something like, oh, this morning I got up, I had a coffee, and then I took my dog for a walk. If you just take the last couple of words that they said, I took my dog for a walk, and you mirror it back to them. In other words, you repeat back to them what they've just said to you. Watch what happens. So if someone says, I got up, I went for a walk with my dog, and you say, walk for your dog. They go, yeah. And you nod along with them. Yeah, no, I went for a walk with my dog, and we went down to the park, and I threw the ball. Oh, you threw the ball? Yeah, no, we've got this, on the chuckers. And you start repeating back to them what they're saying back to you. all you're doing is mirroring back to them what they are putting out towards you. And if you can do this with what they say, you can do it with their body language, like nodding and shaking your head and arms crossed and legs crossed and sitting on the side and scratching your head, whatever they're doing, if you can do the same thing, you just watch how much trust and how much rapport that builds in such a short amount of time. And you might ask yourself, why? The answer is because humans, we are hardwired to trust those who look like us, who behave like us. And that's why we're more likely to hang out with people who have the same religious beliefs as us, the same political beliefs as us, who enjoy the same sports and entertainment as we do, who eat the same foods as us, who speak the same languages as us, and so on and so forth. And it's also why we're less likely to hang out with people with totally opposing political beliefs or religious beliefs, or who don't like the sports that we like or hate the foods that we love. I mean, why would I hang out with someone who's totally different to me? It makes no sense. Humans are hardwired to hang out with and trust people who are like them. So if we're talking about trust, in a nutshell, if you're exactly the same as I am, great. If you're similar to me, good. If you're different, bad. That is how we make decisions about who we can trust and who we can't trust, and therefore who we can let into our tribe and who we need to keep on the outside because they're a threat. That's how it works. Okay, this is story time. I've got a story to tell you, and guess what? Exciting news. You are the main character in the story. So imagine yourself going through what I'm about to tell you. You are the main character. You ready? Let's go. So the story starts with you sleeping through your alarm. You wake up, you're stressed out because you've slept through your alarm, and you're a little bit pissed off at yourself. You quickly throw some clothes on, you get in the car, and you hustle your way to the airport. On your way, you check in online so that when you arrive at the airport, you just gaff it straight to the gate. You make it to the gate just in the nick of time as they're calling your name. You get onto the plane, the pilot pops their head out and says, "It's your lucky day, you just made it, welcome aboard." Now you're on the plane, you can relax. You take off, you land at your destination, and you make your way slowly to a conference. Now, at that conference, you listen to the CEO of a new tech startup who is explaining the challenges of establishing a new business, and you find it fascinating. You get to the end of the day and you're feeling full of energy, but you're a little bit hungry. So you make your way out of the conference center, and on your way to your hotel, you stop in at a local restaurant. You sit down, you have a kai, and while you're eating your delicious steak, you look over and you see a couple who is celebrating their anniversary. You give them a pleasant smile, they smile back at you. How cute. You finish off your steak, you walk out of the restaurant, you go back to your hotel, and you go to bed. The next morning, you jump in the taxi, you make your way back to the airport, you board your plane, and this time you're not running late, thankfully, but the air crew member recognizes you from the day before, and they say, "Hey, welcome back." And you think to yourself, that's brilliant service. You take off, you land back home, everybody lives happily ever after. Cool story, eh? Okay, so what was the point of all of that? In that story, you'll remember that I talked about a pilot. Remember, the pilot popped their head out and they said, "It's your lucky day, welcome aboard." So my question is, what ethnicity was the pilot? We also talked about on your return from the hotel to the airport, you caught a cab. So my next question is, where was the taxi driver in your story born? At the conference, you listened to a CEO of a tech startup. How old was the CEO? And when you went out for dinner, you'll remember there was a happy couple who was celebrating their anniversary. My question, were they a gay couple or were they a heterosexual couple? And last but not least, when you returned back to the airport for your return flight, you were greeted by the air crew member who said, "Welcome back." And you thought, great service. So my question is, what gender was the air crew member? And how old were they? Now, of course, there are no right or wrong answers to any of the questions that I've just asked because I didn't tell you. I didn't give you that level of detail. But no doubt, in your mind as I was going through the story, you would have imagined answers to all of those partai, all of those questions. So when I asked you what ethnicity the pilot was, if you thought in your head, middle-aged Pākehā man, all that means is that your internal bias, your filing system, the book that's been written about pilots that's sitting up on your bookshelf is biased towards middle-aged Pākehā men. That's all. If you thought that the taxi driver was born somewhere in East Asia. All that means is that the book that's been written about taxi drivers that's sitting up on your bookshelf is biased towards people who have East Asian whakapapa. If you thought that the tech startup CEO was somewhere between 25 and 35, all that means is that you're biased towards a younger CEO. But hey, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, they're old dudes. And when I talked about the happy couple who were celebrating their anniversary, I didn't say if they were gay or not. But if you imagined a heterosexual couple, all that means is that the book that's written about couples that's sitting on your bookshelf made your unconscious mind go straight to a heterosexual couple as opposed to a gay couple. Now, if unconsciously you imagined a gay couple as opposed to a heterosexual couple, all that means is that you're biased that way and not that way. And last but not least, if you imagine that the aircrew member was a woman, not a man, or a man and not a woman, who was young, not old, or old and not young, again, that just speaks to the way that the book that's sitting on your bookshelf that talks about aircrew members has been written at some point in your life. And I'll say it again, there are no right and no wrong answers to these partai. The only purpose of that story was to demonstrate to you how your unconscious mind fills in the blanks when it doesn't have enough information to make a logical, analytical decision. It goes to the bookshelf, it retrieves the book, it reads it really, really quickly, and it decides for you on autopilot what a pilot looks like, what a taxi driver looks like, how old a tech startup CEO is, if the couple was gay or straight, and if the aircrew member was a man or a woman. And the point of all of that is just to demonstrate that our unconscious mind is making millions and millions of snap judgments every single day on our behalf. If I said to you, terrible driver, who do you imagine? If I said to you, Christian, who do you imagine? If I said to you, Muslim, who do you imagine? If I said to you, atheist, who do you imagine? If I said to you, single parent, who do you imagine? If I said to you, somebody with tattoos, what does that tell you about that person? If I said to you, this person's wearing a suit, again, what does that tell you about that person? The answer is nothing. None of what I've just told you points to anything except the information that I've told you. There is no way at all that you could know anything more about those people, but your unconscious mind makes a whole bunch of decisions on your behalf because that's what it's designed to do. So here's the rub of the green Oma. Our unconscious mind is making millions of decisions on our behalf. It gets its information from an internal filing system that is a collection of information, of lessons, of memories, of thoughts that have been turned into books that sit up on a bookshelf that are unique to you and me. And every single day, our unconscious mind goes there to pull information and make decisions on our behalf. That is what it's designed to do. So therefore, the unconscious mind has a huge amount of influence over the type of person that we are putting out and portraying to the world. And it's worthwhile us checking in with the information that it's retrieving and asking ourselves, am I proud of that? Is that the type of person that I want to be or not? And if it isn't, then we want to try and work to change the information and update the books and update the hard drive and update the filing system and all of the information that sits within it so that our unconscious mind has got better, more accurate, up-to-date information that it can draw from and make better decisions moving forward. Last couple of examples just to really drill this message home. If I said to you, this person loves cats, who do you imagine? Or if I said to you that this person always follows the speed limit, again, what's coming up for you? Or if I said to you that this person has a disability, or this person is morbidly obese, or this person studied at a university, or this is an interesting one, this person can't speak English very well. And this one I have a personal story about. Years and years ago, I remember sitting with Jess, and she said to me one day, you know, because sometimes we'll go to hui a whānau, and at these hui, we often speak Māori, right? And I remember one day she said to me, I always feel really dumb when I go to those hui. And I said, why? And she goes, well, because I really struggle to articulate my thoughts and contribute into reo Māori. And people must just think I'm really thick. And I said, don't be stupid. No one thinks you're thick. And she goes, well, yeah, you know what I mean. Like, it's not a pity party. I'm not asking for any sympathy. But honestly, like, I feel like I've got a lot to say, but I just can't articulate what I'm thinking into reo Māori. And so I just sit there and I don't say anything. And in that moment, I just had so much aroha for her because anyone who knows Jess, if you've been following the podcast and you've heard her speak, like, she's sharp. She's onto it. And so as a really clever intellectual person sitting there, not being able to articulate your thoughts because you have to do it in another language must be incredibly frustrating for her. And then this idea was really drilled home for me again. A couple of years ago, I was watching a TV show, Modern Family is the name of it. And if you haven't seen Modern Family, kaupapa, it's fine. One of the characters, her name's Gloria, and she's this beautiful young woman. She's got a couple of tamariki, a couple of kids, and she's married to this old white fella. His name's Jay, and he's the typical pale, male, stale, pretty funny, successful business owner. And they're married, and they've got some tamariki together. And one of the tamariki that they've got is a guy called Manny, and he's kind of a young teenager. And anyway, Jay and Manny often team up, and they take the piss out of Gloria, the mum. And I remember watching this episode one time, and normally she's a really good sport about it, but I just remember this one episode where she kind of snapped, and she said to them, in my country, when I'm speaking my native tongue, I'm really funny, and people laugh at my jokes, and I'm interesting, and I'm witty, and all of these, and she kind of lists off all of these things that she is in her native tongue. But she says, you guys take the piss out of me because I can't speak English properly. And you never get to see the best version of me because you force me to speak to you in a language that I'm not comfortable in, that I'm not fluent in. And I just thought to myself, how many people are out there that live amongst us who we force to speak English because we can't speak their native tongue? And because they're living in Aotearoa, we expect that they will be able to speak English to us. And that's fine. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but what I am saying is that how many times do we assume that because this person can't communicate reasonably basic ideas in English as well as we can, how many times do we assume that that person is stupid just because they can't speak English as well as we can? Sometimes we might be forgetting that actually they're speaking in their third or their fourth language, and they're not stupid at all. It's just that they're speaking in their third or their fourth language. And to be honest, I can only speak two, and I know most of us can only speak one, and most of us not even very well. So the point is that just because somebody is speaking in broken English, it would be wise to not just jump to a conclusion that that person's a little bit thick, because maybe, just maybe, they're speaking in their third or their fourth language, and if they were speaking in their native tongue, they might actually be sharp as a tack. I don't know. Just a thought. Anyway, I think we've drilled that enough. Let's move on. How does all of this unconscious bias stuff affect us in real life? Well, it affects us everywhere. But a really simple example is in recruitment. And before I get into recruitment, I want to share with you another story that I read years and years ago, and it stuck with me. So I was reading about an orchestra, and I can't recall where it was from. I think it was Chicago or Boston Symphony Orchestra. And basically, the way that they used to audition people for their orchestra was they would get them up on a stage and they would get them to play a piece of music, and there'd be a panel of judges or selectors or, I don't know, whoever, people that would make decisions about whether or not you cut the mustard or we're going to ask you to come back next year type of thing. And then one year they changed the way that they did their auditions. So rather than doing what they'd always been doing, they decided to drop a black curtain between the person who was auditioning on the stage and the panel of experts and selectors who were tasked with deciding whether or not that person would be selected for the orchestra. And not only that, they removed all of the other pieces of information that might have influenced their decision. So things like their name, where they lived, how old they were, maybe what their religious or political beliefs were, all of that stuff was removed. So therefore, they were literally blind. They knew nothing about the person who was sitting on stage. The only source of information that they had to decide whether or not this person would join the orchestra or not was what their ears were telling them from what they could hear from the person who was playing from behind the curtain. And do you know what happened? Well, overnight, the entire makeup of the orchestra changed. And the reason that happened was because in the past, whether they like to admit it or not, all of those experts and panelists and selectors, their biases were influencing their decision making. And so they were more likely to select people who looked like them, who sounded like them, who believed in the same things as they did, who maybe studied at the same places that they did, who maybe come from a place that they recognize. as opposed to people who are completely different, but are incredibly qualified to play in the symphony orchestra. And we see this happen in recruitment as well. So look, over the years, I've employed hundreds of people, probably seen tens of thousands of CVs, and I've looked into this a little bit. There's some studies that have been done, and they reckon that a recruiter or someone who is tasked with going through a whole stack of CVs will make a decision about a CV within 5 to 10 seconds. And the decision that they have to make is, am I going to put the CV in the maybe pile, or am I going to put the CV straight in the bin? And so 5 to 10 seconds is nowhere near enough time for our conscious mind to analyze and make a conscious, logical decision about whether or not this person should be in the maybe pile or in the bin. And so it's our unconscious mind at play here. And so our unconscious mind is looking at names and going, right, can I trust this name? Right? Because that's one of the things that our unconscious mind has to work out. Can I trust this person? And so our unconscious mind is looking at the name and going, well, is that a name that I recognize? Is that a name that might belong in my tribe? And if it's completely different, then the answer is, well, probably not. What about where they live? Where they live tells me whether or not they're wealthy or if they're poor. And maybe I've got some stereotypes that are associated with wealth. If you're rich, maybe you're hardworking. If you're poor, maybe you're lazy. If I've been taught that at some point in my life, then if you live in a poor suburb versus a rich suburb, that will influence whether I put your CV in the maybe pile or in the bin. Even things like email addresses, right? If I see an email address that says pinkjellybean69@gmail.com, you might think to yourself, well, that person's an absolute idiot. Who has an email address like that? Whereas if I see an email address like anton.matthews@gmail.com, I might go, sensible, you go on the maybe pile. And yet none of this stuff has anything to do with whether or not this person can actually do the job or not. But unconsciously, we are making decisions within 5 to 10 seconds about whether or not this person goes in the maybe pile or in the bin. That is precisely the reason why people who come to New Zealand with foreign names will change their name to an Anglo-Saxon Kiwi name so that they can increase the chances of actually getting an interview, because they know that if they keep their birth name, the chances of them being recruited and interviewed just went down. And that sucks, but it's the truth, and you know I'm right. So, if it is true that human beings are biased, then what that means is that in situations where human beings are responsible for making decisions, those decisions are affected by the biases of the individual who's making that decision. And we have lots of different systems in this country that are operated by human beings. For example, we have a health system. And throughout the health system, we have human beings making decisions every single day. We have a legal system. We have an education system. We have a justice system. All of these different systems that exist all include human beings who are making decisions each and every day. And every single one of those human beings is biased, unconsciously, but nevertheless biased. And what's also scary is that each and every one of those human beings is a tribal animal. And what we know about tribes is that we're more likely to trust and therefore treat favorably people who are like us more so than people who are different from us. And so what this leads to is what we call systemic bias, which is a bias that exists within a system. And the bias comes from the people who make the decisions within that system. And I just want to be really clear, this is not me picking on anybody at all. But to give you an example, I just happen to have some data about our health system and how it treats Māori versus non-Māori. But just to be clear, biases don't just exist between Māori and non-Māori. Our health system probably treats old people differently from young people. Our health system probably also treats immigrants differently from New Zealand citizens. Our health system probably also treats people who live rurally different from city folk. All of those things can be true. I just don't have the data in front of me to analyze all of those biases. But I do happen to know some of the data around how Māori are treated within our health systems. So what I can tell you is that Māori are less likely to be referred by their GP to a specialist than non-Māori. I can tell you that Māori are underprescribed, I'm talking about medication, compared with non-Māori. And I can also tell you that Māori have far higher mortality rates, which means death, than non-Māori. Māori have lower life expectancy. That will be unsurprising to you. So on average, Māori die around about 7.5 years earlier than non-Māori. So all of these are systemic biases. That is to say that the system is biased, in this case, against Māori, and therefore Māori experience inequity or disproportionately worse health outcomes than non-Māori as a result of the bias that exists within our health system. Now, getting back to the root cause of that bias, it's the human beings that are making decisions within the health system, right? So if you got all of the GPs together, I know GPs, I've got good mates who are GPs, I'm not picking on anybody, but if you got all the GPs in a room together and you say, guys, why do you refer Māori less to specialists than non-Māori? Are you racist? GPs will look you square in the eye and say, no, I'm not a racist, and they will be able to rationalize and logically explain why they're not a racist. They might say, look, I've got friends who are Māori, I'm proud when the All Blacks do the haka, I've got a Māori nephew, and I'm learning how to speak te reo Māori, I got a piece of pounamu around my neck, all of these different reasons that will totally explain why that GP is not a racist person. However, what that fails to acknowledge is that everyone has that internal filing system that we talked about, and if hidden amongst all of those books within that filing system are some negative stereotypes about Māori, and unconsciously GPs all over the country are referring to their internal filing system and making decisions about Māori patients who are sitting in front of them, and their internal filing system is full of negative stereotypes about Māori, well, then the likelihood of you making a decision not to refer a Māori patient onto a specialist just went up. And when that happens across an entire population, what you end up with is systemic bias. So to try and bring this all to a close, what's the point of all of this? Well, there's a lot of political tension, not just here in Aotearoa, but actually all around the world, but especially here in Aotearoa, around things like equity. And there's a really big discussion around the difference between equality and equity. Now, if you subscribe to the idea of equality, what you're saying is that everybody is born the same, everybody is treated the same, there is no such thing as bias, there is no such thing as sexism, there is no such thing as ageism, if that's even a word. Whether you're an immigrant, whether you're born here, everybody is treated the same. Everyone has the same equal opportunity in this country. Therefore, everybody should receive exactly the same thing. Nobody should be given special treatment. That is what it means to believe in equality. Equity, on the other hand, believes that it is the fairest system. And what equity does differently is that it walks into a room and it analyzes where everyone is at. And it says, if you don't need help, I'm not going to help. If you do need help, I will use all of the resources that I have at my disposal to give you a hand up. So in order for us to work towards achieving equity, we need to first understand where the inequities lie. And we have to, believe that bias is one of the factors that contributes to inequity. And so, look, I've heard people say, look, we're all New Zealanders, we're all Kiwi, we should all be treated the same. I've heard people say, I don't see colour, I'm not a racist, everyone's the same. I've even heard people say, well, isn't it racist to give Māori special treatment and not others? Isn't that racist towards Māori? I've heard that as well. Why should one particular group get special treatment while everyone else is left out in the cold? And I have a lot of empathy, I have a lot of aroha for some of those people. However, when people say we're all Kiwi, we should all be treated the same, my answer is always something like, well, that's a lovely idea. But what if I told you that we're not all treated the same? What if I told you that I have data that proves that there's a certain group of people that are treated much, much differently from everybody else? What is your answer to that? Do we just accept it and go, oh, well, sucks to belong to that group, or do we do something about it? And this is really where affirmative action comes from. If you think about it, if you're a government and you're given this data, and the data says, well, Māori women are referred 13 times less to a specialist for breast cancer treatment than non-Māori. If that data is sitting in front of you, you've got two choices as a government. You either go, oh, well, sucks to be a Māori woman, gutted. Or you go, shit, that's not good. We need to do something about that. You might get all the GPs together in a room and you might say to them, guys, why are you not referring Māori women onto specialists when it comes to breast cancer treatment? Are you racist? And they'll go, no, we're not racist. And you go, do you know what? I actually believe you, but the data doesn't lie. So if you can't figure this problem out on your own, you're going to give us no choice but to actually affirm an action. In other words, we're going to force you to treat these people differently because we can't rely on the human beings to do it on their own. And that is what it means to have affirmative action. And it only comes about because downstream, those very people who are getting the special treatment down here were getting the not very special treatment upstream, resulting in negative outcomes over here that need to be addressed later. And so when we talk about special treatment, we're only looking at what's in front of us, and we're ignoring the fact that upstream, these very people are not being treated the same. In fact, they're being treated worse, which is what's causing all of the problems that are right in front of us. And so we have to do something about it now because these people have been treated so badly upstream. So when people say to me, well, everyone should just be treated the same, I go, fair enough. Look upstream. They're not being treated the same. And that's why we've got a problem that we have to deal with now. And then people say to me, well, I don't see color. Well, that's flawed as well. And I appreciate that it comes from a nice place where people say, well, look, I treat everyone the same. It doesn't matter if you're from this part of the world or you have this religious belief. I just ignore that. I just treat people like human beings. And that's what they mean when they say I don't see color. But honestly, I think we should see color. And I'm not just talking about color of skin. I'm talking about color of ideas. I'm talking about color of culture, color of language. It's okay that we're diverse and that we're different. It's actually, there is strength in diversity. It's okay to be different. What's not okay is to use people's color or their differences as a weapon against them. We shouldn't be mistreating people because they're different. But we shouldn't ignore their differences. It's okay to be colorful. It's okay to see color. It's just not okay to treat people like shit because they're different from you. So, to wrap all of that up, we know what unconscious bias is. We know that it's a human trait. We know that our unconscious bias has one source of information, that's the bookshelf. That's the database. That's the hard drive that lives within each and every one of us. It's a collection of memories, of urges, of thoughts, of experiences, of ideas that have been built up over time. And all of those books that I talked about that were written when you were younger, all throughout your life, they hold the truth in your unconscious mind. You can't have two books on your bookshelf about the same thing that have two different outcomes. And so when your unconscious mind is going to your bookshelf to retrieve the truth or the correct answer, there can only be one version of the truth. And so it's a worthwhile exercise to try as much as you can to become aware of what your unconscious mind thinks. And we've done a couple of exercises today to help with that. But it's a worthwhile exercise to sit silently in our thoughts, allow our unconscious mind to come up into our conscious mind and let it sit there and ask ourselves, what does my unconscious mind believe about this? And then hold it accountable. Is that what I actually believe? Or have I matured? Have I changed my thinking? Is that an idea that was given to me by my racist uncle when I was 3 years old? And am I proud of that or not? And if it's not, we need to hold that accountable. And we need to find a way to update that information so that our unconscious mind has better information to draw from, so that we don't have to be embarrassed about what our unconscious mind puts out into the world about us. And so the process of doing this is not simple. In fact, it's long, it's arduous, and it's hard. But it all comes down to what we believe is true. The only way to take a book off the bookshelf, rewrite it, and update it with a newer version is if you have lived experience to the contrary of what that book says. So, for example, if the book on the shelf says the sky is blue, I can tell you the sky is red. I can produce studies, I can produce documentaries, I can produce anecdotes, I can produce a whole bunch of information and evidence, and you will not believe that the sky is red until such time as you look up into the sky and you see the sky is red. When you see that and you have lived experience, now no matter what anyone tells you, if they say to you the sky is blue, you'll go, no, it's not. It's red, because I have lived experience. And that is the path to updating the information on our bookshelf. We have to have lived experience. We have to believe in our heart of hearts that information that I was fed when I was younger is not true. And the reason I know it's not true is not because somebody told me. It's not because I read a book. It's not because I watched a documentary, but because I lived it, I experienced it, and without a shadow of doubt, I can tell you that is not the case. I know this is the truth. And until you can absolutely guarantee to yourself that that is the truth, that book will stay up there. So look, if you hold negative stereotypes about immigrants or Māori or poor people or rich people or business owners or people on the unemployment benefit or young people or old people or this generation or that generation or whatever, until you have lived experience and unequivocal proof within yourself that, in fact, this is the truth about all of those different people, only then can you rewrite some of those books that are sitting on your bookshelf full of bad, outdated information that you're no longer proud of, that you no longer believe. And then you can update that hard drive, you can update that library, you can update that reservoir, you can update that bookshelf with new information that you can be proud of, that you believe. And now you have your conscious mind and your unconscious mind both working from the same set of information. And that's a long and arduous and difficult process to go through, but it's one that's well worth it, e homa. Because when we get to that point, our unconscious mind is in sync with our conscious mind, and that means our unconscious mind has been fed far better information and making far better decisions on our behalf. So yeah, that's it. That's enough for today. I appreciate you guys hanging out. If you found that interesting, let me know. Let me know in the comments. I think this is the second time I've done a solo episode like this, but I enjoy it. So if you enjoy it, let me know in the comments and I'll do more of it. If you don't, let me know so I can get some more guests on, or so I can get Jess back on. But yeah, look, thank you very, very much for joining me for the latest episode of Beyond the Hustle. I hope you learned something. But yeah, we'll leave it at that. Have an awesome week, and until next time, ngā mihi.